Hello and welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is finally the week that training camp begins for Ohio State. College football is back, baby. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. It's here, fellas. It's time.
Finally.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Well, let's get excited. Camp starts Thursday for Ohio State. Thursday morning, the Buckeyes will be back at it. My question for you both is if you got any answers before the start of camp at Big Ten Media Days, or are you still going in with some uncertainty? Bill?
Yeah, I feel like I was left. I felt pretty sure of what I thought was going to happen of the tackle position. And then Ryan Day's like, hey, Tegra Chabola, Luke Montgomery, those guys are in the mix. And I was like, what? Yeah, I don't know. I still think that's probably mostly just the head coach, trying to foster some competition, let some other guys, feel good, feel like they're in the fight. I think imbue some younger players with confidence than probably need it because they're going to be important, even if they're not starters. But I guess there's a small percentage chance that it is actually more wide open than we anticipated. I don't really think that's the case. I guess I'd ask you guys what you think, but I was not expecting the tackle conversation to kind of take that turn when Ryan Day threw those names out there.
Yeah, Bill, but to me, doesn't it seem like that was only right tackle because the first name he mentioned about the offensive line was Josh Fryer, and it seems to me like that side is locked up. So is it a situation where Josh Simmons, maybe coming from San Diego State, isn't ready to launch himself into that spot? Or, as you said, is it about making sure Luke Montgomery, Tegra Chabola, and these guys stay engaged? Zen Mahalski did not get mentioned at all. So, is he not in the mix? I think that my opinion and what we saw out of Josh Fryer, a week before when we saw him over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and talked to him on last week's Manic Monday episode of the Podcast Daily, was that I feel pretty confident that Josh Fryer is Ohio State's left tackle. And beyond that, I don't know anything else about the offensive line.
Well, you know who the guards are.
Tackle position.
I was going to have Bill put odds on each of those three guys, which one's going to be at the head of the line on Thursday, because I think that it's still going to be Josh Jimmy Simmons.
That would be my guess. I don't think I'd be terribly surprised if it were Tegra or even Zen. I did find that interesting that Zen's name was not mentioned. And I think that's probably just you got a big roster. Sometimes if you get to say guys' names, I would put a bet on Josh Simmons being at the front of the line too. But I would say maybe Tegra has sneaky value in that situation there, because Tegra has obviously been around longer. He did split first team reps last year, and even if they think eventually Josh Simmons is going to be the starting right tackle, you know how football coaches are. They want to make a player feel like he has to earn it. So if they put him second in line, I don't think I'd be floored by that.
But do you know how else the coaches are? They see a 6'5", 330-pound freak athlete like Tegra Chabola, and you go, boy, if we can just find a way to use him and get him feeling the right confidence and launch him into the next level of his capability. Tegra Chabola is a different type of athlete, maybe other than Donovan Jackson that Ohio State has on the offensive line. So I think that there is this hope that you're pulling something out of him and creating this monster that you think he can become by making sure that he knows this isn't a done deal.
This may well sound like a broken record because that's sort of what the offseason is like, but Berm, we also saw Tegra Chabola at that camp a week and a half ago. And as you said, he's different, built different, they might say.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. I think good.
I
don't know.
I'm curious, because I agree with you guys. And it's not even really based off last year's sample size, because he actually didn't play all that much. I think he played 50 snaps. But as a recruit, I was oh, this guy looks like he's got something to him. But I still don't know that I'm convinced about the footwork to play tackle. I think he's super strong and moves really well for a kid who's as big as he is. But I don't know, the speed element of tackle is still a question for me, Berm. I don't do you think he's made some strides there, or at least will, I guess, when the time comes for him to be a starting tackle at Ohio State?
For me, the thing with Tegra has been and will continue to be, is he confident enough in what he's doing to convince himself he belongs out there? I think athletically, No, he doesn't. He's not like Luke Montgomery footwork wise, where Luke's been a basketball player his whole life, and there's a significant advantage for someone like Luke in that spot, or Joshua Simmons, who has played, played college football and played tackle. Bottom line, though, is that what you get out of Tegra Shabola is a strong. I mean, you can't rotate offensive linemen based on run pass situations, right? So he's going to have to learn how to be really adept at both spots. I think that long term, and we both agree with this, that his long term best future is at guard. But like, if no one else is stepping up entirely at right tackle, which is again sort of the feeling I got from Ryan Day's comments, not necessarily that he was trying to motivate one way or the other. I just think it's clear that they haven't seen Joshua Simmons practice. So until that happens, I think you're reluctant to throw him the right tackle because you haven't had him out of practice yet.
Yeah, it's really not possible for somebody to step up and claim a starting job at right tackle over the summer. There's not pads on. You're not getting true one-on-one opportunities against JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer. You're not in the offense on a day-to-day basis. So all of that is going to be new for Josh Simmons. So maybe that's a reason not to bet on him to be first in line on Thursday. Maybe I'll lose those units, whatever I decide that they should be, and in favor of someone like Tegra or Zen, because they've been through that before. That doesn't mean that it would be that way by August 15th, but this is still going to be new. I think that might have been some of the point and the emphasis there from Ryan Day last week, is like, you can't put him at the top of the depth chart without ever actually see him practicing at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's not surprising. I also thought if we're just going to stay on the topic of the offensive line, it wasn't
only
like,
if you want to. Only if you want.
I mean, I'll grab a hold of the wheel and keep this an offensive line conversation. Ryan Day did not say like Carson Hinsman is our starting center, but I felt like he crept pretty close to it. I don't know what you guys thought about that. He was asked there was a writer from Wisconsin at Big Ten Media Days, like asking everybody from Ohio State about Carson Hinsman, which I find interesting and kind of funny. But I'm glad that he did, because Ryan Day had, I thought, pretty solid praise for the work that Carson Hinsman has done in the offseason. And the way that I took it was like, we're going to give him every opportunity to prove that he's a starting center. Now, Jacob James, I think, is still very much in that conversation. Maybe it's just those two. I don't know. But I came away from those comments thinking like, oh, I guess maybe it's not as much of a competition as we would have believed, I don't know, a week ago.
Again, it's the same situation though. Like, Jacob James has not been able to practice since January. So like, that becomes a much different conversation than you would have imagined it was 8 months ago. Now, I mean, we believe Jacob James will get in there and compete and make himself into an option for Ohio State, but you can't dismiss the fact that Carson Hinsman has a head start at this point, aside from the fact that just being able to be physically stronger because he was able to lift and stuff all spring and all summer, where Jacob wasn't. Jacob is a football guy, and he's going to make it hard for Carson Hinsman to beat him out. So if Jacob James is the starter at center, or if Carson Hinsman is the starter at center, what I know is that Ohio State is going to have very high level center play this year, one way or the other.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Ryan Day said about the quarterback situation when he was pressed. Is it good that they're close, or bad that it's close? I think the center situation is another example where Ohio State probably feels like it can't go wrong. If you have a veteran like Jacob James who proves definitively that he should be ahead as he returns from injury, great. You have someone who's got some stability and some familiarity with maybe Kyle McCord, if that's what winds up happening in a different battle that we'll talk about later on in the week as we get closer and talk to the quarterbacks on Wednesday. But if the other option is a really touted, recruit a couple of years into the program who got a good spring and he takes hold of the job, well, that's good too. I don't think Jacob James is the kind of person to shirk away if he doesn't just start against Indiana. I would say the same for Hinsman. I think there's going to be two good options there. And for all the uncertainty that we may have about how exactly it's going to shake out at right tackle or what's going to happen at center, Ohio State's almost certainly going to be in a position where it can feel good about the depth going through the season, because you're still going to need it. You have to, knock on wood, anytime you're in the situation with three new starters, that you can absorb any losses or any health setbacks that may occur. It's a long season. It's a grind. And considering that they have to refill three starting spots, I think they're in a really good spot in terms of depth. But that's 10 minutes of offensive line that Bill made us dive into to start. So Burn.
Oh, I had another offensive line question.
All right, let's do it. I shouldn't step on your toes.
Yeah, well, you are right that this maybe should not just be an offensive line specific podcast, but Ryan Day did say that they're going to like move some guys around, and maybe it's not settled all the way coming out of camp, and a lot of that I think is stuff that coaches say kind of every year when they're trying to find new offensive linemen. But what I want to ask you guys is this: the starting five we see against Indiana. I'm not going to ask you who you think it's going to be, but do you think that will be the same starting five at Notre Dame? Like independent of injuries, obviously they could shake things up just based off like play on the field and what they're able to get done in the first 3 weeks of the season. Do you think that starting five will be the same week 1, week 4?
I mean, you sure hope so, right? I mean, if it's not, then probably had a rough couple of weeks. You don't want to head into your first or the big game at night at Notre Dame and be changing up things on the offensive line, especially at tackle or center, which are two of, we feel pretty confident that you'll have Matt Jones and Donovan Jackson at guard. You certainly don't want to be changing things up against Marcus Freeman and what the Irish are going to try to do, probably pass rush wise against the Buckeyes. So my opinion is that yes, it will be. I think that puts the onus on Justin Fry and Ryan Day to get it right over the next 5 weeks. But that's why these guys make a lot of money. I think that they have to feel pretty confident in what they're doing. And the reality for Ohio State is that whoever is out at their right tackle is going to go through some growing pains in week 1. Indiana's going to blitz like crazy. And you're going to see some things where the offensive line on both sides of the tackles look confused at times and probably get beat. But I don't think it's a situation where you can just throw the baby out with the bathwater that early. Like I think if you're Ohio State, you have to commit to this new offensive line early and stick with it as long as there's not like a disaster happening.
So you wouldn't rotate guys in? Like you wouldn't like if say it's Josh, the two Joshes at tackle, you wouldn't say like, hey, let's give Tegger a look and see how that feels against Indiana or Western Kentucky?
I would say that you hope that you get a chance to play the depth at home for sure in the first in weeks 2 and 3. Now, does that mean you're asking if same group starting heading into Notre Dame? I would imagine you have to feel very confident in your starting five at Indiana because you're going on the road in the Big Ten to start the season. I don't think you go into that like with 1 foot in the water. I think you have to be very, very concrete in your plan.
Yeah. I thought that question was going to be easier to answer because of all the reasons that Berm laid out, Bill. But the more I thought about it, the only reason that I would crack the door is week 2 and 3 will allow you a different opportunity for evaluation. Now, I still think that the group that you roll with against Indiana after 29 practices, good or bad, you would want them to work that out the next couple of weeks and get better against Western Kentucky and Youngstown State and be ready for Notre Dame. However, to your point, you have an opportunity there that may allow you to get live game reps that could change your thinking in a way. I still don't think that would happen because the body of work in August and then the experience against Indiana, you're probably pot committed at that point. But you raise a good question that I don't think maybe was as obvious as I thought it was initially.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. Obviously, the preference would be that you don't have to change anything. And if I had to guess right now, I would guess that starting five is the same week 1, week 4. But as you said, Austin, the schedule does open it up enough that I think you could experiment a bit if you want to. And I talked about this with Doug like last week. Like I'm reminded a little bit of the 2014 offensive lineman, like Billy Price switched sides. I think a little bit early on. I think there was a third guard they were working into the mix too with the Pat Elflein early on, especially in the opener against Navy. So I don't know. I don't think I'm looking at for Ohio State to like fully rotate along the offensive line against Indiana or even in the other 2 games. But I think there's enough of a build up to that Notre Dame game that they could maybe change their mind along the way.
All right. Love it. Berm, take us somewhere new.
I am just want to reiterate that I'm extremely confident in the Ohio State secondary right now. And maybe that's fool's gold. I don't know. I think if this group stays healthy, I think that the return to what people expect from the Ohio State secondary, the BIA, the silver bullets, all these things that, people are longing for, I really do feel confident it's coming back. I don't know how you keep Sonny Styles off the field. Every single person we talked to last week reiterated that and said, somehow you find a spot for him. I think that if Davison Igbinosun and Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke are healthy, those three are as good as any trio in the country. And then you have the return of Lathan Ransom, who obviously he wasn't at his best in the last couple games of the year. I'm not going to blame him for slipping against a guy running a 10-3 or whatever, like he did against Georgia. I'll put that one on the coaching staff for putting him on an island against a guy running a 10-3. But the reality is, I think that other than that nickel spot where you're rotating in maybe Cam Martinez, Jihad Carter, Jair Brown, like that's the one spot where I think you are looking at it and going, well, if this guy steps up, then this secondary is going to be great. Otherwise, I think you're looking at the one spot where maybe it's a little bit of a weakness. But other than that, I think the secondary is going to be flat out phenomenal. And talking to coaches last week, talking to Ryan Day a little bit, talking to the players who were there, like there's a ton of confidence in the secondary. And I think that people should be excited for that.
Yeah, it's not just the coaching staff. You hear it from players on both sides of the football. Sonny Styles. He's a freak. He's got to play. He's got to be on the field. And that I don't think is a surprise to any of the three of us, but Bill and I have had these conversations and people are probably, sick of hearing them. Like, I don't know how you configure it with the safety driven defense to account for Sonny Styles. If Josh Proctor is doing what he's supposed to do, which, we had the same conversation last year going into the opener and he lost his starting job after one drive. I mean, that's the most obvious place for Sonny Styles to play outside of some of these extra packages and as a bonus linebacker where, he could probably be a factor too if that's what Ohio State decides. But I don't know that there's a more intriguing player on the roster going into Thursday than Sonny Styles.
I think I agree with that. Yeah, I'm basically like, if Sonny doesn't play, I'm going to riot. I think is where I'm at. Like, people can join me if they want to. We'll figure out a time and place. If Sonny's not playing, we'll get that done. We'll enact that change. But I think that's going to happen. I think there's just been too much talk about him from like everybody, including the important decision makers, about how good this kid is and how much he's grown, that I'm not really fearful of them not finding a role for him, or at least not. Maybe if there's any fear in my mind, it's a relatively small amount. And I think like, you can sense it too from maybe like a guy like JT Tuimoloau, who was asked a ton about, like, you guys want to get more sacks this year. And obviously that is a conversation that is defensive line driven. But as we've said before, like the back end of the defense has a big say in that. The quarterback has to hold the ball an extra half a second. That does a lot for the defensive line. And I felt even from talking with him that he is feeling pretty good about where the back end of the defense is, and their efforts to, I think, help the defense as a whole, obviously, but really help that front, whether it's the defensive lineman or the linebackers blitzing, which that Jim Knowles likes to do a fair amount, actually get to the quarterback as opposed to like, missing it by a hair. I think like the difference between getting him and not getting him in those situations is, a slightly better technique from a cornerback sometimes, or a better jam at the line of scrimmage, and just disrupting that timing the least bit. And I think that this secondary is in a much better position to do that this year than they were last year.
Yeah. And it's easy to sit here and say, okay, this was the same conversation we had last August. But it's not the same conversation. The depth is significantly better now. Even if there is an injury or two, the depth is way better. But you can't dismiss the fact that Denzel Burke couldn't tackle because of his shoulder, and Jordan Hancock couldn't play because of his hamstring. And then you add in, the issues that Cam Brown had with his health all year long, stack that up against a healthy group, adding Igbinosun, adding Jermaine Matthews, adding Kelvin Simpson-Hunt, adding Jihad Carter, who can play multiple spots. The growth from Jair Brown, who we hear a lot of positive things about, Ryan Turner getting better. Like, this is a much more complete group at corner and at safety than there has been before. And we spend a lot of time on this platform trying to brush people's hair and tell them to calm down about things. I agree. If Sonny isn't playing a lot, like, we can formulate a plan to go buy pitchforks altogether. Like, we can make an NIL inspired pitchfork drive where we get fans together, we all buy pitchforks, and all the money goes to NIL or something, because you simply can't. I understand more than anyone, maybe except for Austin, how freaky Josh Proctor is as an athlete and what he could do if he's out there doing things. But we're in year 6 of that experiment. Sonny Styles in a normal college football world would have just graduated from high school 6 weeks ago. So I think you just have to lean into what Sonny can do athletically and what makes him different. And there's a reason people are ranting and raving about him, and it's not because they have to. This is not a situation where they're trying to keep his keep him happy before he signs a new contract or something like that. I mean, he's there's something different about this secondary this year, and I'm excited to see it.
Ranting, raving, and potentially rioting. The 3 R's of training camp.
Yeah.
Respectfully rioting.
That adds up.
The 2 of you are on board. I'm outvoted. I guess we have to riot if it doesn't happen. I wasn't planning on it. Because maybe that means that Josh Proctor in year 2 of a system is doing all those freakishly athletic things because he's an older version of Sonny Styles.
The more guys doing freaky things, the better, is all I'm saying. Like, I'm just saying you can't dive into a situation where you're only playing your starters. Yeah. You're only playing 3 guys. Like, you have depth, you have talented depth. Run them all out there. Keep them rotating. The best years of the Ohio State secondary have been when Kerry Combs had 3 elite starting cornerbacks and he could rotate them in. Just play them all. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Those are some big questions, one on each side of the football as we get ready for the start of training camp on Thursday for Ohio State. We'll have more. Yes, we left out the quarterbacks. I promise we're going to get to that plenty as the week rolls on. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast daily to start the week in the big month ahead for the Buckeyes. For Bill and Burr, I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.